Hey guys, so I am finally back from LA. I will be posting my vlog very soon. I think I'm gonna get this video up first though. And I know it's not Monday and I have no makeup on, but I got sick again in LA. What is new? And it's that time of the year where it gets extremely hot, so makeup just didn't sound appealing right now, but it's cooling off this weekend, which I will film my DragCon makeup look that I wore on day one. Now if you clicked on this video and you don't care about any of those things, I apologize. I just wanted to give you guys that because I haven't talked to you in a really long time. So this month is Mental Health Awareness Month, which this video has nothing really to do with mental health. It is psychology related, but it's not mental health related. But we're gonna talk about it anyway because it won in the poll. I think it did. I don't know. Last time I checked it was winning. So anyway, today we're gonna be talking about the psychology of horror and why we watch it willingly, why we subject ourselves to horrifying imagery and things. First, we're gonna start with an article that I don't agree with at all, which sounds counterintuitive, but I just want to explain to you guys that, like, in research, don't always go off the first thing that you find online or the first, fact that you see. There's always going to be further research, especially something psychology related. It's a soft science, so there's always going to be new studies, new theories coming out. So always, keep your critical thinking cap on, and if something doesn't seem right, it's probably not. And it's okay to disagree with psychology studies. A lot of people do. In fact, a lot of people say that's wrong, I'm gonna do it again and prove you wrong. First of all, the first red flag when I read this article, which I'll link all my research down below, it said that horror and suspense typically has low production costs. Since when? Pretty sure horror movies need to have really high budgets because of the practical effects or the CGI that they use, so Also, they mentioned that those who seek out horror have adrenaline-seeking personalities, which is not true in my case. Maybe I'm just the weird one because a lot of research has shown that those who like horror are typically sensation-seeking people, which I am not in the slightest. I'm a highly sensitive person, and so I get overwhelmed really easily with stimuli. I don't like adrenaline at all. So none of these theories really explain why I personally like horror, but it is still interesting because some of them I can kind of relate back to myself. So maybe you're in the same boat as me, I don't know. So obviously there's some physical things happening in the brain when we watch a horror movie. There's the fight or flight response, and there are parts of the brain that are more active when we watch horror movies, such as the hippocampus, which is what we use to retrieve memories and help us give context to the film that we're watching and kind of relate it back to our own lives. Another point where this article kind of gets it wrong is the amygdala, which is how we decode emotion and process fear and how we process threats. However, this part of the brain, the amygdala, is more for unexpected threats, and other studies have shown that this part of the brain is not actually that active when we watch horror movies. And then of course the hypothalamus, which is what activates the fight or flight response, which most of the time is active, especially in tense, suspense, or jump scare moments, which we don't like here on my channel or on my horror channel. I did think about doing this on my horror channel. If you haven't subscribed over there, go do that. But I did think about doing that. But I think I'm just going to relate it back because it is more psychology based than horror based. So one of the theories is excitation transfer theory, which is when those who experience an emotional response to horror also experience more enjoyment when the situation is resolved. Like, we like to see the good people survive, basically, and it's a physical response in our brain that we actually get more enjoyment out of that. However, for me, I don't like that personally. You guys know, if you watch my horror channel, I like the endings where everyone dies because I'm weird, I don't know. But also, studies have shown that people actually enjoy the scary parts more than the resolution parts. So there's another theory by Ron Tamburini that those with higher empathy should enjoy horror less than those with low empathy skills. Now, I want to be a counselor, which you have to have really high empathy, and I think that's one of my greatest traits and biggest fallbacks. But one of my greatest traits, and yet I love horror. And a lot of the other studies that I saw are that, obviously I mentioned the sensation seeking, and also those who have above average aggression and are male. So clearly, I don't agree necessarily with everything that article stated. Let's move on to the next one, shall we? Now, the next theory is actually really interesting and something I definitely believe in. It's the evolutionary theory. And it's definitely, horror tells us something about human nature and what we're innately afraid of, because a lot of horror themes have something in common usually. It's the common threat of being eaten or disease is something that our ancestors had to deal with back in the day. So something like vampires are actually originated by the threat of disease. And there's a science writer named David Quammen that says, among the earliest forms of human self-awareness was the awareness of being meat. Meaning that a lot of our ancestors were actually food to carnivores, because we're not at the top of the food chain. If you think so, sorry, we're not. So our ancestors didn't have the same kind of protection from threats of animals and stuff eating them. And so part of our brains are permanently changed, like it's still within our cognition that we can be eaten, and in fact children are more likely to identify snakes on a computer screen than flowers. So we're trained from birth to see animals as a bigger threat than other things. However, modern day threats such as guns don't get our attention in the same way, which maybe down the line, thousands of years from now, it will, who really knows? So our instincts and our ancestors' history can help explain why we're afraid of certain things. Not necessarily why we enjoy horror movies, but why we actually get scared. For example, the fear of clowns and fear of people wearing masks. You can't see their face or their facial expressions, and that is how our brain processes their true intention and other humans' true intentions. We like to try to read their mind by reading their facial expressions. So when you can't do that, it often causes an innate fear that we're not really sure why. Like when you look at a clown, what are they gonna do? Like obviously fear of clowns still existed before Stephen King, so it's our brain processing like that is not a person to trust because we don't know what they're gonna do to us. So one of the theories of why we would possibly want to go to the theater and get scared is that our brain is trying to rehearse situations, like threatening situations, while we're feeling safe. Or if you're Freud, it allows us to live our deepest desires and passions and fears of our id, which is our deep, unconscious desires. Which that one I've heard of before. I don't necessarily believe in it because although we have a fascination with gore and stuff like that, not all of us want to act it out, But it's a psychoanalytic theory, which is very, very hard to prove scientifically, so that one is kind of just a theory, not necessarily anything. So according to Glenn Walters, 3 things need to be in place to make a horror movie enjoyable, and that is tension, relevance, and unrealism, which is the most important one of all of them. There's a study done where researchers showed college students 3 very disturbing documentary-style videos, which I'm not going to go into detail. 2 involved animals, 1 involved a baby. They were real videos. Okay, none of the people really made it to the end of the video. They had them turn it off. However, those people would, go to see a horror movie. What's wrong with that, right? To go see some gore on the big screen and not turn it off or walk away. It's because it's the fictional horror settings that allow us to feel a sense of control, and we place a psychological distance between us and the violent acts happening because they're not real, and we know in our brain, as realistic as they might seem, that they're not real. And most of us have issues watching real gore, which that's me. I can't do it. I can't look at real imagery of things happening. I actually went to the Museum of Death in LA, and as fascinating as it was, there was one wall I could not look at, and that was the car accident wall. I looked at all the other gore, the serial killer stuff. It was amazing, but there's a whole wall of car accidents back when they didn't have seatbelts. So I couldn't do it with my fear of driving and stuff. Nope. So another article that I was reading had an interesting kind of explanation, in that there's 4 types of horror watchers. There's the gore watcher, the thrill watcher, independent watcher, and problem watcher. So gore watchers have low empathy. This is typically not like guaranteed, and this is still just a theory, but typically have low empathy, high sensation seeking, and if you're male, it's only for males, which I thought was interesting. You have a strong identification with the killer, which I like some gore here and there, but I don't consider myself a gore watcher. Thrill watchers have high empathy, sensation seeking, and like the suspense of the film, and they identify with the victims more. Which that one most explains me. I think I'm not a sensation seeker, but I do like suspense in films, and I don't like jump scares. But other than that, I like the creep factor, you know. Independent watchers have high empathy for the victims and a high positive affect for overcoming fears. So this is kind of explaining they really like it when the good person wins, basically. And problem watchers have a high empathy for victims, but typically have a negative affect characterized by helplessness. So this is probably for those of you who don't like horror movies, who can't watch them, or you get like such a negative emotion from them that they're not enjoyable to you, so you just avoid them. There's another popular theory that you've probably heard of catharsis, which actually dates all the way back to Aristotle, which is interesting. I had no idea. And this one I've heard the most growing up. My mom would use it to explain me and just, you know, getting out those pent up aggressive emotions, which I don't have, but it's a way for us to work through our negative emotions, I guess. Also, people say sports are a catharsis to get out aggressive tendencies, and also violent video games. But again, that one's a psychoanalytic theory, so it's really hard to prove, and not a lot of research has really backed that up. Now for me, I'm gonna give my own little theory, my mom's theory rather. She believes that me watching horror, this kind of goes hand in hand with one of the things I talked about, but she thinks that I like horror because it's a way for me to cope with my fear of death, which is very interesting because I do have a very strong fear of death and dying. So she thinks it's kind of like exposure therapy, and the more I watch it, the more I get accustomed to the idea of losing loved ones or losing my own life. So that's my mom's theory on why I like horror. I don't know. So everything that I talked about is correlation, not causation. So none of these theories are 100% fact. A lot of times in psychology, that's really hard to do because it is a soft science, as I mentioned, so studies typically aren't 100% fact. They're always pretty much just theories. So what you believe is pretty much what makes the most sense to you. And there are many, many things that make us enjoy the horror genre, and it's all individual. Like, I like horror movies, you know, that are different from what you like. So, I mean, it's just all up to the individual viewer, and it's really hard to explain why we like them. But I hope this gives you some idea as to why maybe you like horror movies, or your friend or whoever in your life likes horror and you just want to know why. But it is hard to test scientifically, so we may never know why we enjoy being afraid sometimes. Let me know your theories down below, why you think you like horror, or what you like about it specifically down below. I hope this was enjoyable, and I will talk to you guys soon. Bye.